All right, we're going to start talking about greatest common factor. You used greatest common factor to reduce or simplify fractions in fourth and fifth grade. And we're going to use greatest common factor more on rewriting expressions and problem solving. So that's what we're going to be using greatest common factor in sixth grade for. So greatest common factor, just to remind you, it is the largest number or factor that can go into two or more numbers. There are two ways that you can find the greatest common factor. The first way is to list every single factor that can go into every number that you're working with. The other way is to use prime factorization, which we're going to call cake or slide method. And if you want more information on the slide method, you can Google on YouTube slide method and watch lots of different ways on how to do that. But I'm going to be doing that in this video as well. So for our first example, we're going to be finding the greatest common factor, or GCF, of 12 and 16. So I'm going to do the first way, which is the list, and then I'm going to do the second way, which we call the cake or the slide method. So if we're going to make a list, we're going to list every number that 12 and 16 have with numbers that go into them. So if I list out 12, and a lot of you, this was called the rainbow method when you were in elementary school because you made rainbows to the factors. So 12, I can do 1 times 12. And you guys would make a rainbow with those two numbers. Okay, then 2 goes into 12. And it's 2 times 6. And you would make a rainbow with those two numbers. And then 3 times 4. And you would make a rainbow with those two numbers. And those are all the factors that go into 12. The reason I don't like the list is because sometimes we forget a factor, and that sometimes is the answer to the problem, and then you've already missed the problem. So you are welcome to do the list. The list is not incorrect. I just prefer the second method. So just to give you a heads up on that. Okay, so if we're making a list of all the numbers that go into 16, 16 is 1 times 16 and 2 times 8. And then 4 times 4. So those are all of my factors that go into 16. Now we look for any common factors. Well, my common factors are 1, 2, and 4. So those are my common factors. Now I want my greatest common factor. So my greatest common factor is 4. So 4 is my greatest common factor, or my GCF, of 12 and 16. Now, if I'm using the cake or slide method, which is prime factorization, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put both the 12 and the 16 in the division bar. And then I need to go through my prime numbers to figure out which numbers go into 12 and 16. So 2 goes into 12 and 16. 2 goes into 12 6 times. 2 goes into 16 8 times. Now, neither of these numbers are prime, and we need to see if there's another prime number that can go into both, and 2 can go into both of these numbers. 2 goes into 6 3 times, and 2 goes into 8 4 times. Now, since 3 is prime and 3 does not go into 4, I stop. I'm completely done with my prime factorization of 12 and 16. Now, greatest common factor means, where are my common factors? Well, my common factors are 2 and 2. So if I do 2 times 2, I end up getting 4, which is what we got up here using the list method. The reason I like the cake and the slide method is because, first of all, if I have 12 sixteenths, 3/4 is my simplest form, and an equivalent ratio is 6 to 8. So it also gives me equivalent ratios in the slide method. And if this was a word problem, 3 and 4 would be part of my word problem answers, which I'm going to show you in the next video with greatest common factor word problems and least common multiple word problems. So that is one way to find greatest common factor. Now let's look at another example. Okay, so what about 7 and 9? Okay, so if I'm going to make a list of my factors that go into 7 and 9, 7 is just 1 times 7 because it's a prime number. 9 is 1 and 9, and 3 times 3. So those are all my factors with 7 and 9. The only common factor they both have in them is 1. So that is my greatest common factor. Okay, and the reason why it's my greatest common factor is because 7 is a prime number and 7 doesn't go into 9. Let's say this was 14. If this was 14, then 7 would actually be my greatest common factor because 7 goes into 14. So if I've got a prime number and another number, composite number, usually my answer is going to be 1. So if I look at my cake or my slide method and I put my 7 and my 9 inside of my division bar, okay, there are no prime numbers that go both into 7 and 9. Since there are no prime numbers that go into both, then my GCF is automatically 1. Okay, so it depends on what type of numbers you have on what your greatest common factor is going to be. Sometimes my greatest common factor is going to be 1. Sometimes it's going to be a factor that's inside, like my 12 and 16 on my previous example. And sometimes it will be one of these two numbers. So you really need to look at what's going on with your numbers on what your greatest common factor is going to be.